Welcome back to Under Baobab Skies. Tonight, we journey into the heart of the Sahel to explore the harsh yet profound life of the Fulani cattle herder, a people whose footsteps have carved faint trails across lands of dust, thorn, and drought. Their cattle bells have echoed for centuries across vast plains where the line between survival and suffering has always been perilously thin. The Fulani are one of Africa's great nomadic peoples, their lives, culture, and very identity interwoven with the cattle they guide across the continent. Yet, behind the romantic image of a lone herder beneath a blanket of stars, the reality was grueling, a daily struggle against the elements. Every dawn began with a familiar hunger in the belly, the heat already rising from the parched soil, and weary eyes scanning the horizon for waterholes that might have long since turned to dust. Let's pause here for a moment. Imagine the fire crackling softly, the immense silence of the night descending as we rest beneath the stars, just as they did. The world of the Fulani stretched from the shores of Senegal to the highlands of Cameroon, from the bend of the Niger River in Mali to the plains of Nigeria. They walked with their precious herds for weeks, sometimes months, tracing ancient paths passed down not on maps, but through memory and oral tradition. The Sahel is a land of fleeting green, where rivers can vanish into the sand and the hot winds carry whispers of hardship. To live here was to arm oneself with patience, for time itself moved not by the clock, but by the slow, deliberate rhythm of survival. But this is not a story of despair alone. It is a powerful testament to human resilience, the incredible ability to turn scarcity into wisdom, and hardship into a deeply rooted identity. Among the Fulani, cattle were never just animals. They were living wealth, a source of immense pride, and spiritual companions on a lifelong journey. To lose your herd was to lose your status, your very place in the world. To tend them well was to ensure your name lived on, respected and remembered. The desert winds may have been cruel, but the Fulani carried songs to soften the long journey. They carried prayers for protection, carefully stitched into the amulets they wore, and they carried love, expressed in quiet glances exchanged by the firelight. A silent promise of solidarity even when tomorrow guaranteed only more walking, more searching, more enduring. Tonight, we follow in their footsteps. We will walk where their bare feet once pressed into the ancient earth. We will listen for the gentle lowing of cattle in the fading dusk, and we will watch the same night sky bend over their endless, awe-inspiring migrations. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you find these stories as fascinating as we do, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more tales from across the continent. You are now under Baobab skies, and our story truly begins now. Across the vast Sahel, a sea of grass and dust, the wind whispers tales of centuries. Here, long before the first light chases away the glimmering stars, the Fulani herder's day begins. The air is still cool, filled with the restless stirring of his long-horned cattle. Their low moos are a soft echo on the plain, a familiar call to action. Barefoot on the dry earth, his stick resting across his shoulder, he gazes out at his world. It's not a village with stone walls or busy markets. It's the open land, stretching so far the sky seems to swallow itself. Every morning is the same ritual. Wake, check the herd, feel the familiar pang of thirst, and begin the long walk toward grass and water. The journey is never easy. The path is often cracked and dry, the sun already scorching the earth before mid-morning. Other times, it's thick mud, a memory of rains that fell too hard and vanished too fast. But there is always movement. The Fulani are a people of motion, belonging nowhere and everywhere. Their home is wherever the herd can feed, and their wealth walks on for hooves. Keeping that wealth alive demands endless endurance. Water holes are scarce, wells collapse, and streams evaporate in the relentless heat. Each day is a gamble, a fine line between survival and starvation. The herder feels the thirst burn his own throat, but he knows the cattle are what matter most. A cow without water gives no milk. A cow without grass cannot grow strong. And without his cattle, a Fulani man is nothing. He remembers the stories his father told him, tales of generations who walked these same paths. He recalls how his ancestors would paint the cattle's horns with ochre before long migrations, a blessing for strength. He can almost hear the women's songs as they milked the cows at dawn, their soft voices a prayer for the herd. The Fulani don't just herd cattle, they live through them. They are guardians of life. But this guardianship comes at a great cost. A single trek can stretch for weeks, crossing borders and lands that aren't their own. There are days when the cattle collapse along the path, their tongues lolling, their ribs showing through their hides. In those moments, all the herder can do is whisper prayers into the wind. A boy may grow into a man on these journeys, but he will never forget the first cow he lost the hollow silence when its breathing stopped. The heartbreak of having to leave its body behind for the vultures circling high above as the herd moved on. The journey is also deeply lonely. The herd provides a kind of company, but there are long, silent stretches broken only by the sound of bells on the cattleless necks and the crunch of sand underfoot. To fill the emptiness, the herder hums old Fulani songs, melodies that speak of rivers that no longer flow and grasslands that now exist only in memory. These songs carry his spirit forward, even when his body aches for rest. The greatest fear, however, is the dry season. It's more than just heat. It's a hunger pressed into the very soil. Streams turn to dust trails. Grasses wither into brittle stalks, and wells sink until only mud remains. Each year, the herder wonders if this will be the season that finally breaks him. If his herd will vanish into death, leaving him with nothing but an empty calabash and a heart full of sorrow. At dusk, when the herd is gathered, he kneels by a small fire. His body is sore from the day's trek, but his eyes never stop scanning the horizon. Even in rest, vigilance is everything. The plains are not empty. Other herders roam these lands, and bandits prowl in the shadows. A single night of carelessness could cost him his cattle, or even his life. Sometimes, in his sleep, he dreams of rivers wide, flowing rivers with water so pure he can drink until his belly aches. But when he wakes, the river is gone. The sun is rising once more, and the trek must begin anew. These cattle, though they suffer alongside him, are his companions in hardship. He knows their moods, their voices, their unique pace. He knows which cow will lead the way and which will lag behind. He recognizes the sound of their thirst, the weak cough of a calf struggling to walk, the hollow thud of hooves on dry sand. His life is inextricably tied to theirs. His very identity is stitched into their hides. For the Fulani, endurance is not a choice. It is destiny. A child born into this life is raised on stories of strength and sacrifice. By the time he's old enough to hold a walking stick, he is already part of the herd's long journey. By the time he's a young man, the plains are his map, and thirst is his constant companion. And yet, despite all the hardship, there is immense pride. To endure these endless treks, to find water where others would perish, to keep the herd alive, this is honor. A Fulani man is measured not by his gold or land, but by the health of his herd. And so, with cracked lips and weary steps, he walks on, guided by both hunger and dignity. Sometimes there is relief. A patch of green after a sudden rain, a hidden pool of water shaded by ancient baobab trees. In those moments, the herd rushes forward and the herder's heart lifts. The cows drink deeply, and for a short while their bellies are full and their steps are lighter. But he knows this relief is temporary. The journey is far from over. Tomorrow, the trek will continue. The Fulani herder accepts this truth. Life is movement. To stop is to die. This endless journey becomes more than survival. It becomes his identity. His life is woven into the dusty paths of his cattle, into the footprints that vanish behind him, into the thirst that teaches patience, and the endurance that builds unbreakable strength. This is the rhythm of the Fulani, walking, waiting, watching, and enduring. And though the land is harsh and thirst is a constant shadow, there is a profound beauty in this persistence. Every step forward is a testament to survival. Every drop of milk at the end of the day is a victory. And every dawn, though heavy with the promise of struggle, carries with it the hope of a new day. The world of the Fulani herder isn't just shaped by drought and thirst. It's also shaped by danger, the kind that comes not from the earth or sky, but from other men. On the endless plains of the Sahel, survival has never been a solitary struggle. It's always been contested. One herd against another, one clan against another, strangers against kin. The land is too thin, the grass too sparse, the water too precious to be shared freely. And so, from his earliest memories, a Fulani child learns that there are enemies out there, waiting. When dusk falls and the herder gathers his cattle, the soft shadows of the animals stretch across the ground. The bells tied around their necks make a faint clinking sound. It might seem peaceful, but in the distance there are always eyes watching. The fire crackles softly, and as we rest beneath the stars, a sense of unease hangs in the air. Raids can come without warning. At night, when the herd is sleeping, or at dawn, when the herder is weary from a long trek. A rival clan might rush in, their shouts carried by the wind, their spears gleaming in the first light of day. The cattle scatter in fear, dust rising into the air like smoke, and chaos follows. For the Fulani, cattle aren't just wealth, they're life itself. To lose a cow is to lose food, status, a future bride price, even one's name. Men will risk their lives to protect their herds, chasing raiders barefoot across the plains, shouting, calling, sometimes clashing with sticks and spears until blood is spilled. But the bandits aren't always other Fulani. Sometimes they come from hostile tribes, neighbors who see the cattle as easy spoils. Sometimes they are desert raiders, men hardened by sandstorms and hunger, sweeping in on horseback or camel, striking quickly, then vanishing back into the horizon. The memory of these raids carves itself into the Fulani psyche. A young boy, hiding behind his father's legs, watching men fight in the flicker of firelight. A woman, clutching her child as shouts fill the night. An old herder, gripping his stick, standing firm even though he knows his strength has long since faded. These aren't isolated moments. They are the rhythm of life, the unending test of endurance. Conflict isn't only about cattle. It's about pride, about identity, about drawing lines in the dust and declaring, this land, this herd, this life is ours. To be Fulani is to know that enemies are part of the story, just as much as drought and thirst. Let's pause for a moment. The fire crackles, and the stars above seem impossibly bright, witnesses to a history of conflict. But not all conflicts come from strangers. Rivalries exist within the Fulani themselves. Families might quarrel over grazing land. Brothers can dispute the inheritance of cattle. A single herd can split, tearing kin apart. In a world where survival balances on such a thin line, Even small disagreements can grow into bitter battles. At times, peace is negotiated. Elders sit beneath the shade of acacia trees, speaking slowly, weighing their words like gold. A bride might be promised to heal a wound between clans. A cow might be exchanged as compensation. The Fulani believe in honor, and sometimes honor can be restored with patience and wisdom. But other times, peace fails. And then, the blood of cousins can stain the soil just as easily as the blood of strangers. Bandits, enemies, rivals, they shape the herder's nightly prayers. When he ties the calves near the camp, he looks over his shoulder. When he lies down to rest, he keeps one ear tuned for the sound of hooves in the dark. Trust is never complete, and vigilance is as important as endurance. Stories passed from generation to generation speak of great cattle raids, some successful, others tragic. Songs tell of young men who risked everything to reclaim stolen cows. And though the stories are meant to inspire, they also carry a solemn warning. No herd is ever completely safe. The herder lives between two truths: that life requires cooperation, shared wells, exchanged marriages, peaceful meetings at the market, and that life is always at risk of violence, sudden, sharp, and merciless. Let's rest here again, by the fire, under the watchful gaze of the cosmos. Through it all, the cattle remain at the center. The herder endures thirst for them, fights for them, and grieves for them. And the cattle, in turn, are silent witnesses to the struggles of men. Their bells ring in the night, a steady, patient sound, reminding the Fulani that even in conflict, life must go on. A raid can scatter them. A battle can claim them. But each dawn, the herder gathers what remains and begins again, walking forward, wary but unbroken. This is the way of the Sahel, a life of endurance, but also of constant vigilance. A life where enemies are as much a part of the landscape as the dust, the stars, and the thirst. And so, the Fulani herder lives not just with drought, but with danger, not just with thirst, but with fear. And yet, he carries himself with dignity, for to endure both the land and its enemies is the true mark of survival. If enemies threaten the Fulani herder from the outside, then disease and famine struck from within. And of all the dangers faced on the long walk across the Sahel, these were perhaps the cruelest, the most silent, and the most devastating. The herd was the very heartbeat of Fulani life. The cattle were not just animals to be bought and sold, they were walking wealth, the source of milk and butter, the dowry for a bride, and loyal companions on the endless road. A man's worth, his family's security, his place in the world, it was all measured by the health and size of his herd. But like people, cattle could fall sick. And when sickness spread, it wasn't just a single life that was threatened, but the survival of an entire family, an entire clan. The loss of a herd was the loss of everything. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. A brief moment of peace in a life defined by constant vigilance. Cattle diseases came with many names, whispered in fear around the evening fires. Some herders spoke of the asterisk, Samor asterisk, the wasting sickness that leached the strength from a cow, leaving it thin and weak until it could no longer stand. Others feared bovine pleuropneumonia, a terrible lung disease that filled the air with the sound of coughing, as cattle stumbled, struggled for breath, and collapsed. And then there was the great enemy, the silent killer delivered by the almost invisible bite of the tsetse. This sickness of the blood could turn the strongest bull into a listless shadow of its former self. A herder could watch his healthiest, most prized bull suddenly grow sluggish. It would refuse to graze, its head hanging low. Day by day, its energy would drain away until it finally sank to the ground, its eyes glassy, its breath ragged and shallow. There was so little he could do. He would try ancient remedies, brewing herbs gathered from the sparse landscape. He would offer fervent prayers to God, begging for mercy. He would tie protective charms to the horns of the sick animal, a desperate appeal to tradition and spirit. But, so often, the disease had its own unyielding will, and the herder could only watch, helpless as a vital part of his life slipped away. The loss of a single animal was a deep and personal wound, but the loss of many was utter devastation. Imagine a herd of 50 cows, a source of pride and prosperity, dwindling by the day. First 10 are gone, then 20, then half the herd has vanished, their bodies left behind on the trail. Children who once drank fresh milk with every meal were suddenly left hungry, their small hands holding empty cups. Women who churned rich butter for trade at the market now sat with empty calabashes, their livelihood gone. Men who once held their heads high, respected as herders of great wealth, now walked with the stooped shoulders of beggars, their spirit broken. Disease was a thief that struck without pattern or warning. It might sweep through a herd in a season of plenty, turning lush green pastures into silent, desolate graveyards. Or it could strike in the heart of a drought, when the cattle were already weak from hunger, making any hope of recovery impossible. It was a constant, unpredictable threat that hung over every herder every day. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest again beneath the vast, silent stars. A chance to contemplate the fragility of this life. Starvation was the other great shadow that haunted the Fulani. The Sahel is a land of cycles, a season of rain, then a long, dry spell, then rain again. This is the rhythm they live by. But when the rains failed to come, when the dry season stretched on and on, the land turned against them. The once nourishing grass became brittle dust beneath the unforgiving sun. The earth cracked and hardened. The cattle began to suffer. You could see it in their bodies. Their ribs grew sharp as knives under their hides. Their eyes, once bright and alert, sunk deep into their skulls. They wandered farther and farther each day in a desperate search for food, only to find bare earth and thorny scrub that offered no sustenance. For the herder, this was a slow, walking agony. With every step he took, he heard the low, weak moans of his hungry cows, a chorus of suffering that followed him from sunrise to sunset. Every morning, he had to count the ones that had fallen during the night, their bodies too weak to rise again. Some young calves, too frail to keep up, were carried on his own shoulders, a heavy burden of love and desperation. And sometimes the moment came when he had to gently set a calf down, say a final goodbye, and walk away, knowing it would never rise again. It was a choice no man should ever have to make. The Fulani sang laments 4 times like these. Their songs were filled with sorrow, echoing the hunger, the thirst, and the herds lost to drought and plague. The old men, the keepers of memory, told stories of the great starvation years, times so terrible that entire clans were scattered, forced to abandon their way of life, walking like ghosts across the plains. They remembered the air thick with dust, the constant, heartbreaking cries of children with empty stomachs, and the haunting silence of the fields where, just a season before, the gentle music of cattle bells had rung. Even today, those stories are carried in the collective memory of the Fulani people. They are not just tales of sadness, they are profound warnings. They remind every new generation that wealth can vanish in a single season, that pride can wither in a single, rainless year. And yet, these stories also serve another purpose. They are testaments to endurance. For those who survived, even after losing everything, always rebuilt. They would gather the few cattle that remained, trade what little they had at distant markets, and with incredible courage, they would start all over again. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest one last time beneath the star-dusted sky. Reflecting on the strength of the human spirit, the herder's resilience was forged in these fires of hardship. His true skill was not just in guiding cattle to water, but in reading the subtle signs of the land. He had to know which dusty path might still hold a few blades of hidden grass, which dried up well might still hide a trickle of precious water at its bottom, and which elders' advice passed down through generations could guide his family through the hardest season. His knowledge was his greatest tool against despair. Mothers, too, carried an immense burden. They were the heart of the family's survival. They would ration the last drops of milk, find ways to stretch what little food there was, and comfort their hungry children with stories and songs, even when their own stomachs were aching and empty. In these times of crisis, families leaned on one another with unbreakable bonds, and clans leaned on the strength of tradition. Prayer for divine help, patience in the face of suffering, and constant movement in search of life, these were their only weapons against utter despair. In the end, cattle, diseases, and starvation taught a cruel but enduring lesson that life in the Sahel is fragile and survival is never, ever guaranteed. The Fulani herder walked with this truth in his heart every single day. He knew that human enemies could take his cattle by force, but disease and famine could take them silently, without warning and without mercy. And still, he walked on. He walks on today, because to give up would be to abandon not just his herd, but the long, unbroken line of ancestors who had endured these same trials before him. Every cow lost was a scar on his heart. But every cow saved, every calf born, every day survived, was a triumph against the odds. And it is through these scars and these triumphs that the Fulani have shaped their identity, a people of astonishing resilience, tied forever to the fragile, beautiful, and often brutal rhythm of their cattle and their land. The Fulani way of life was not simply a matter of choice. It was dictated by the skies, the seasons, and the invisible breath of winds that carried clouds or swept them away. To understand their migrations is to understand how weather itself became a calendar, how the rain was not just water but the keeper of time. In the Sahel, where the desert presses downward and the green belt pushes upward, life has always been a delicate balancing act. The Fulani learned early that survival depended not on settling too deeply, but on listening to the air before dawn, the tilt of the clouds, the distant rumble of thunder. Where the rain went, grass would follow, and where grass grew, cattle could be fed. This rhythm, wet and dry, abundance and scarcity, became the Fulani compass. Herds of longhorn cattle move across the plain. For months, the land would be parched and baked. Wells ran low, dust clung to nostrils and eyelids, and the sun seemed eternal. The air itself grew thin and sharp, carrying with it the scent of cracked earth and the silent anxiety of waiting. Every sunrise was a promise and a threat, painting the horizon in hues of orange and red, but bringing with it another day of relentless heat. The cattle, the lifeblood of the Fulani, grew restless, their ribs beginning to show beneath their hides. Survival hung by a thread woven from patience and an ancestral trust in the cyclical nature of the world. Then, suddenly, almost as if on cue, clouds drifted in with the monsoon winds, their shadows racing across the baked plains like divine messengers. In July and August, the Sahel became transformed. The first drops of rain struck the ground with a sizzle, releasing a rich, earthy perfume that filled the air and signaled a turning point for all life. The earth turned a darker brown, soaking up the life-giving moisture greedily. Waterholes that were mere muddy hollows just days before filled to their brims, reflecting the vast, dramatic sky. Responding to this ancient signal, herders moved their cattle into pastures that only weeks before were barren, desolate stretches of dust. The transformation was swift and profound, a vibrant explosion of green against the ochre canvas of the land. It was a cycle as old as memory, a covenant between the people and the elements. The Fulani herder didn't he need a clock or a calendar. The grass itself was a timekeeper, rising and fading with an authority no chief or king could command. These winds didn't just shift grasslands, they created roads in the imagination. The Fulani traced invisible highways across West Africa, following routes known for generations, etched not on parchment but into the collective memory of their people. From the highlands of Fouta Djallon in Guinea, across the broad plains of Mali, through the acacia-studded landscapes of Niger and into the bustling northern territories of Nigeria. Families packed their lives onto the backs of donkeys or oxen. The essentials were few but precious: woven mats for sleeping, clay pots for cooking, and the all-important gourds for milk. Children, with an energy that seemed to defy the long miles, walked barefoot behind the ever-moving cattle, their laughter and shouts mingling with the lowing of the herd. Women, with an innate grace and strength, balanced gourds of fresh milk and calabashes filled with butter on their heads, their posture a testament to a lifetime of movement. At the front of the procession, men carried long, slender staff symbols of their authority and tools for guiding. The herdand called out songs that echoed across the savannah, ancient melodies designed to keep the herd together and lift the spirits of the travelers. The journey was slow, measured, and deeply connected to memory. It was a pilgrimage, dictated not by a single destination, but by a series of life-sustaining points scattered across the vast landscape. Each landmark held significance. This well, now a deep and reliable source of water, was known to a grandfather who had dug it deeper during a lean year. That grove of towering baobab trees had once offered life-saving shade and forage for the cattle during a sudden, unexpected famine that had struck generations ago. The land became a storybook, a living library of their history, where each bend in a river or cluster of stones held a tale of hardship or salvation, of birth or of loss. Migration was never random. It was a form of cartography without maps, geography carried in songs and stories passed down through the centuries, a sacred knowledge that ensured their survival. But the migration corridors were more than simple routes of survival. They were arteries that tied the Sahel together, pulsing with life and commerce. These ancient paths were conduits of culture, news, and goods, connecting disparate communities across thousands of kilometers. Along these roads, the Fulani exchanged formal, poetic greetings with Hausa traders carrying salt from the desert's edge, or bargained for grains and textiles at bustling market towns that sprang up at the crossroads of these nomadic highways. Their presence was a constant, a familiar sight that marked the changing of the seasons for the settled agriculturalists they passed. Sometimes, these encounters led to quarrels with rival herders over access to scarce water or grazing land, a tense negotiation for resources that defined life in this fragile ecosystem. They were never isolated. Their constant movement stitched together societies that otherwise might have remained apart, their lives interwoven with those of farmers, merchants, and artisans. The Fulani brought their milk, butter, and livestock to the markets, and in return, they acquired the goods they could not produce themselves: millet, sorghum, pottery, and woven cloth. This symbiotic relationship though sometimes fraught with tension, was essential for the stability and richness of the entire region. The herders were the mobile threads in the vast tapestry of West African life, their journeys binding the desert with the savanna, the nomad with the villager. The wet and dry seasons imposed a kind of order, a predictable rhythm that governed movement and life, but it was also an order laced with uncertainty. The reliability of the rains was the foundation of their world. Yet it was a foundation that could tremble and crack without warning. Some years the rains arrived faithfully, showering the land in abundance and ensuring the health of the herds. In other years they were late, or worse, they failed to arrive at all, and the once lush pastures withered into brittle stalks. In these times the cattle grew thin, their milk dried up, and the spectre of hunger haunted the camps. Drought could be devastating, a slow, silent catastrophe that scattered entire clans across hundreds of miles in a desperate search for survival. Families might find themselves strangers in distant valleys, far from their ancestral roots, clinging to rumors of green pastures beyond the horizon. The wind, so often a friend that carried the promise of rain, could become a betrayer when it carried only heat and dust, a harbinger of famine. The sky, once a source of hope, became a brassy, unforgiving expanse that offered no relief. It was in these moments of profound hardship that the true character of the Fulani was forged, in the crucible of environmental precarity. And yet, even in this uncertainty, the Fulani carved identity. To endure was to prove resilience, to follow the rhythm of earth and sky without despair, trusting that the cycle would eventually turn once more. This constant negotiation with nature shaped their worldview, instilling in them a deep sense of humility and interconnectedness. The seasonal cycle became more than survival. It became philosophy. It taught them patience, foresight, and the importance of community. A Fulani herder looked at the clouds and saw not just weather, but destiny. In the direction of the wind and the color of the sunset, they read the story of their future that was never guaranteed, but always faced with courage. The story of the Fulani cannot be told without their journeys. To be Fulani was to move, to trace lines across the Sahel and beyond, chasing rain and grass, carrying memory and cattle in equal measure. But these movements were not always gentle. Migration often meant entering the lands of others, and with that came negotiation, trade, and sometimes war. In the heart of what is now Nigeria, the Fulani came into contact with the Hausa city-states. The Hausa had long built walled towns, thriving markets, and complex monarchies. Their fields stretched outward, dotted with millet and sorghum. To the Fulani, these cities represented both opportunity and threat. The cattle needed land to graze, but Hausa farmers needed land to farm. Friction was inevitable. Some Fulani entered these Hausa states not as conquerors, but as neighbors. They sold milk in the markets, offered leather goods, or served as warriors for Hausa rulers. Over time, many adopted Islam, which gave them common ground with the Hausa elite. Yet, beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Farmers accused herders of trampling crops. Herders accused farmers of blocking ancient grazing routes. The grass itself became a contested frontier. To the west, Fulani clans pressed into Senegal and Guinea. There, too, their arrival reshaped societies. The river valleys and forest edges offered rich grazing, but they were already inhabited by other communities: Mandinka, Wolof, Susu. The encounter was not a simple conquest. Some local groups welcomed the Fulani as traders, valuing their milk, butter, and cattle. A powerful chief might even form an alliance with a Fulani clan. gaining their skilled herdsmen and warriors in exchange for protection and grazing rights. The relationship was symbiotic, a delicate balance of mutual need. Over generations, this proximity forged new identities. The Fulani identity in these western regions began to blend with local traditions, producing unique dialects that mixed Fulfeld with Mandinka or Wolof words. Their dress adopted local patterns. Their music absorbed the rhythms of the forest peoples. They became Senegalese Fulbe, Guinean Fulbe, still pastoralists at heart, but now carrying both the old memory of the open Sahel and the new realities of riverine life. This was not a loss of culture, but an adaptation, a testament to their resilience. The journey was not just overland, but through cultures. But the story of Fulani migrations was not simply about finding new pastures. It was also a story of survival in a landscape shaped by politics and war. In many regions, Fulani herders found themselves caught between powerful, expanding kingdoms. They were a people without a state, a mobile nation whose wealth their cattle was constantly in motion and vulnerable. To pass through a kingdom's territory, they often had to pay tribute, a tax levied in the form of their most prized animals. Chiefs and kings demanded cattle to fund their armies and courts. And when herders resisted, the consequences were swift and brutal. Conflict was a constant shadow. A refusal to pay could trigger a raid, with royal soldiers sweeping down on a Fulani camp to seize cattle by force. The same herds that gave the Fulani their livelihood and status also made them perpetual targets. This precarious existence taught them to be wary, to master the arts of negotiation and, when necessary, defense. They became experts at reading the political landscape, knowing when to pay, when to flee, and when to fight. Their freedom was defined by their ability to navigate these dangers, to keep moving just beyond the reach of greedy rulers. One of the fiercest and most enduring encounters came in the desert edges, where the vast Fulani pastoral lands met the domain of the Tuareg. The Tuareg were the undisputed lords of the Sahara, their lives centered on the camel, their caravans legendary for carrying salt, gold, and slaves across the immense desert. They were warriors bred for the harshness of the sand sea, their faces veiled in indigo, their traditions ancient. When Fulani herders, driven by drought, pushed their cattle too far north into the semi-arid scrublands, they risked trespassing on Tuareg caravan routes and salt-rich pastures. These were not just accidental meetings. They were collisions of two proud, mobile peoples, each masters of their own environment. Battles would flare in these desolate no-man's lands, where the land was too poor for farmers but vital for nomads. The conflicts were swift and deadly. Swords flashed in the blinding sun as mounted Tuareg warriors on their swift camels clashed with Fulani herders on foot, defending their cattle with spears and courage. Herds would scatter in terror, the dust of the skirmish mingling with the ever-present threat of a brewing sandstorm. Yet, these violent conflicts were not a state of endless war. Survival in the Sahel demanded pragmatism. Often, the bloodshed would end in uneasy truces, brokered by clan elders who understood that permanent hostility was unsustainable. A Tuareg caravan, rich in salt from the desert but lacking in food, might trade its precious blocks for the milk, butter, and cheese of a Fulani clan. A Fulani group, in turn, might agree to pay a toll tax in cattle to a powerful Tuareg confederation for the right to graze safely in their territory during a harsh, dry season. Over centuries, this friction created a rough, shifting equilibrium. It was not true peace, but a form of coexistence built on mutual respect and shared hardship. The migrations also left indelible legacies in the cultural fabric of West Africa. As the Fulani moved, they carried not just their cattle, but their entire world, their stories, their music, their language, their values. They introduced pastoral songs about the beauty of a long-horned bull to the farming villages of the Guinea highlands. They brought proverbs about the importance of grass and the wisdom of cattle to the bustling markets of Senegal. Their oral histories, epic poems recited from memory, became part of the region's shared heritage. In turn, they were not immune to the cultures they encountered. They absorbed the complex polyrhythms of drums from their Wolof neighbors, incorporating them into their own festivities. They learned the intricate weaving patterns of Hausa artisans, adapting them for their blankets and decorations. From the Tuareg traders, they heard tales of the distant desert, of oases and gold mines, which filtered into their own folklore. Migration was never a one-way street. It was not just a movement of bodies, but a dynamic exchange of ideas, technologies, and art. Yet, beneath all this exchange and adaptation, the Fulani remained fiercely, profoundly aware of their distinct identity. This identity was rooted in *PULAAKU*, the unwritten code of the Fulani. It was a philosophy that prized patience, fortitude, and dignity. To be Fulani was to walk behind cattle, to value the freedom of the open road, to measure a man's wealth in the size and health of his herds rather than in gold or land. Even when they settled in towns for a generation or two, even when they adopted the clothes and languages of their neighbors, the memory of the migration stayed alive in their souls. This identity was renewed with every cycle of the seasons. Every year, as the first rains began to fall, herders would feel the ancient pull. They would lift their sticks, call to their cattle, and lead their families toward the promise of greener pastures. This seasonal transhumance was more than an economic necessity. It was a ritual, a physical act that reminded them of who they were and where they came from. It reconnected them to the journeys of their ancestors and reinforced the values of mobility and independence that defined them. And still, the conflicts with farmers, chiefs, and rival nomads persisted, a constant, low-level hum of tension across the Sahel. For centuries, these struggles remained localized, a dispute over a trampled field here, a cattle raid there, a skirmish at a watering hole. But in time, the simmering tensions, especially between the nomadic, devoutly Muslim Fulani and the settled, often syncretic states, would build to a breaking point. What began as small-scale disputes over land and cattle would one day fuel a revolutionary jihad that would erupt across the region, reshaping the entire political and religious map of West Africa. The quiet frictions we spoke of earlier between Fulani herders and Hausa farmers, the resentments over tribute, the murmurs in the mosques didn't stay quiet forever. By the dawn of the 19th century, this tension erupted into something far larger than raids or quarrels. It became a movement, a storm carried not by wind but by faith. At its heart stood a scholar named Usman Danfodio. He was Fulani by birth, raised in the Sahel's rhythm of herding and hardship. But his mind had traveled farther than any cattle route. From a young age, he immersed himself in the study of Islam. He memorized the Quran, studied law, and grew into a powerful preacher. To those who listened, his voice carried not just knowledge, but an undeniable conviction. For years, he moved from village to village, calling for reform. He saw corruption in rulers who grew rich while peasants starved. He saw chiefs who demanded tribute from herders and farmers alike. He saw a faith that, in his view, had become diluted by custom and greed. His sermons called for a return to purity, to an Islam that was just, disciplined, and rooted in community. The Hausa city-states, where Fulani herders had long lived as minorities, became the crucible for this unrest. In towns like Gobir, Fulani scholars gained followers, while rulers grew uneasy. They feared the movement could challenge their authority. In time, their fear turned to hostility. When Danfodio and his followers faced persecution, they were forced into exile. But exile didn't weaken the movement, it hardened it. In 1804, a jihad was declared. What began as sermons now turned into war cries. Fulani herders who had once carried only staffs took up spears. Students who had once copied verses now carried swords. The conflict swept across the Hausa states like fire across dry grass, and the Fulani, long seen as outsiders, suddenly found themselves at the head of armies. Their mobility, the same skill honed from generations of migration, became their greatest strength. They moved swiftly across the savannas, striking at towns and gathering allies. Discontented farmers, rival clans, and religious students all joined their ranks. It wasn't only a Fulani war, but it was the Fulani who gave it shape, direction, and a powerful identity. The result was staggering. Within a few years, Hausa kings fell. Ancient thrones were overturned. In their place rose something new, the Sokoto Caliphate, with Usman Danfodio as its spiritual leader. The Sokoto Caliphate wasn't just a political victory, it was a total transformation. For the first time in history, Fulani herders, long marginalized and mocked as wanderers, stood as the rulers of one of the largest empires in Africa. From their capital at Sokoto, their authority stretched across much of what is now northern Nigeria, Niger, and beyond. Danfodio himself did not rule as a king. He chose a life of scholarship and retreat, leaving political authority to his son, Muhammad Bello, and his brother, Abdullahi. Together, they organized the caliphate, establishing Islamic law, schools, and a sophisticated administration. The Fulani identity, once tied only to cattle and migration, now carried the weight of empire. But empire was not without its contradictions. Some Fulani herders who had fought in the jihad found themselves paying taxes to Fulani rulers. Scholars who had once preached against corruption now wielded immense power and wealth. The caliphate's strength lay in Islam's unifying force, but the reality of governance required compromises. Still, for generations, the Sokoto Caliphate thrived. It became a beacon of Islamic scholarship, with scholars writing books, poems, and legal texts in Arabic and Fulfulde. Its leaders corresponded with rulers as far away as Timbuktu and Cairo. Markets flourished, linking the savannah to the desert, the forest to the river. And yet, beneath all the grandeur, the old Fulani way of life remained. Even the sons of rulers might still spend time herding cattle in their youth. The memory of the trek, the rhythm of migration, lingered deep in Fulani hearts. To be Fulani, even in palaces, was still to carry the echo of cattle bells in one's blood. The Sokoto Caliphate lasted for nearly a century, a testament to Fulani resilience and vision. It shaped not only Fulani destiny, but the wider history of West Africa. Its shadow can still be seen today, in the religious, cultural, and political landscapes of Nigeria and its neighbors. But empire, like cattle herds, is never eternal. In the early 1900s, colonial powers arrived. The British conquered Sokoto in 1903, bringing the caliphate under their rule. The once rising flame of Fulani sovereignty flickered, subdued by foreign conquest. Yet the Fulani spirit did not vanish. The legacy of Danfodio lives on, his memory still invoked in sermons and stories. For the Fulani, The jihad was both a triumph and a burden. It gave them power, but also tied them to the complex politics of empire. It lifted their status, but challenged their core pastoral identity. Still, in the quiet nights when herders camped under the Sahel stars, they could look back and say, "Once, we were not only wanderers, we were rulers." Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The cattle are silent, and the desert wind carries the echoes of distant drums. For the Fulani people, cattle were never just animals. They were the rhythm of life itself, wealth, memory, song, and spirit, all bound together in the sound of hoofbeats and lowing calls. To speak of Fulani culture is to speak of cattle, because without them, the story truly loses its heart. Among the Fulani, a man Esworth was unjudged by the coins in his pouch or the land beneath his feet, but by the size and health of the cattle in his herd. Each animal was a walking treasure, more alive than gold, more enduring than fleeting currency. The herd was a bank, a dowry, an inheritance, and a source of immense pride. To have cattle was to have status. To lose them was to lose face, to be stripped of dignity itself. But these animals were not just property, they were companions, almost like kin. A herder knew each animal intimately by its shape, its color, its unique temperament. He might even compose a song to praise the graceful curve of a cow's horns or the brilliant whiteness of her hide. From a young age, children learned to love the cattle, watching their parents stroke them, decorate them with tassels, and speak of them in reverent, gentle tones. Cattle were also the key that unlocked family life. When a young Fulani man wished to marry, it was his cattle that spoke on his behalf. The bride price, known as the Bogle asterisk, wasn't measured in money, but in cows. To offer cattle to a bride's family was a profound statement. It proved his responsibility, his strength, and his readiness to build a new life. The more cattle offered, the more respect he earned. And so, the herd became more than just wealth. It was the bridge between families, the very foundation of new unions. Women, too, carried a deep and sacred bond with the cattle. Milk was their domain. It was collected, fermented, and churned into rich butter. In Fulani tradition, milk is the embodiment of purity, a symbol of life and blessings. It was said that to offer a guest milk was to honor them with something truly sacred. Its creamy whiteness was often compared to the moon, shining and untainted. Even in their proverbs, milk symbolizes goodness. To say someone's heart is like milk means they are kind, pure, and trustworthy. This sacred relationship has inspired countless songs and poems. Fulani herders are known across West Africa as masterful poets, composing verses not with ink and paper, but in memory, sung aloud while watching their herds graze under the vast sky. Many of these songs are actually love poems, but they aren't for women, they're for their cattle. They compare the eyes of a beloved cow to the stars, the shape of her horns to the crescent moon, and the smoothness of her hide to flowing water. These weren't just flowery exaggerations. They expressed a worldview where cattle were absolutely central to existence. To lose them in a drought, or to watch disease take them, was a devastation that went far beyond hunger. It was the loss of poetry itself, the silencing of the songs that gave life its meaning. Let's just pause here for a moment. Imagine the fire crackling softly as we rest beneath the stars. In the distance, the lowing of cattle rises and falls, like a gentle lullaby drifting through the Sahel night. Cattle also carried a deep spiritual meaning. Some Fulani groups believe that each cow holds baraka kind of divine grace or blessing. To mistreat cattle was to invite misfortune upon yourself. To dishonor them was to dishonor your ancestors. This belief bound herders to their animals with an almost sacred responsibility, a duty to protect and care for them. The Fulani language itself reflects this intimacy. It contains a wealth of words for cattle, each one carefully distinguishing color, size, pattern, and the shape of their horns. This incredible richness of vocabulary reveals a profound depth of observation, a poetic closeness with the herd. Just as sailors have dozens of words for the wind and sea, the Fulani have countless words for their cows, each one a whisper of their central importance. Cattle were even linked to the myths of their origin. In some Fulani traditions, it's said that their ancestors were born alongside cattle, that their destiny and identity were forever tied to the herd. Where the cattle moved, the people moved. Where the cattle died, sorrow followed. To be Fulani was to be the people of the cattle, chosen to guide them across the dry, uncertain plains of the Sahel. In times of plenty, when the rains were good, the herds grew fat and proud, and celebrations would fill the air. Festivals often featured spectacular cattle parades, where herders would show off their strongest, most beautiful bulls. Young men competed not only in acts of bravery, but in how well they could tend, decorate, and present their animals. For them, pride in their cattle was pride in themselves. But in times of scarcity, the herd's thinness was a mirror reflecting human suffering. A long drought could shrink the animals to bone, and the herder's spirit would shrink right along with them. For the Fulani, cattle were mirrors. Their health revealed the health of the people, and their strength revealed the strength of the culture. This profound bond has endured for centuries, surviving through the rise and fall of empires, the lines drawn by colonialism, and the pressures of modern borders. Even today, for many Fulani, cattle remain the primary measure of wealth, an essential part of weddings, a subject of songs, and a core pillar of their identity. That sacred bond still hums in the background of Fulani memory, as constant and as beautiful as the sound of cattle bells ringing under the vast African sky. Let's pause here again. The night deepens and the fire's glow softens the world around us. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the quiet rhythm of hooves in the sand, an echo that has traveled through the centuries. If cattle were the flesh and breath of Fulani life, then the amulets, charms, and sacred symbols they carried were the invisible shield against a harsh and uncertain world. The Sahel, stretching wide and merciless, offered both sustenance and danger. Drought, raiders, and disease could strike at any time. Against these forces, the Fulani leaned not only on skill and resilience, but on belief. Small objects carrying prayers, leather pouches filled with verses, symbols etched into skin and memory. Among the Fulani, the grease, small protective amulets were as common as the sun overhead, made of leather and worn round the neck, on the arm, or tied to a cow's horn. These amulets were believed to carry blessings, or baraka, from God. Inside them might rest a slip of paper, carefully inked with a Quranic verse, folded and sewn into a pouch by a skilled craftsman. The words of Scripture were not seen as mere ink. They were alive, radiating unseen power that guarded the bearer from misfortune. And hanging from a young herder's neck, with Arabic script faintly visible on folded paper inside. These protective charms were not limited to people alone. The cattle, too, bore their share. A prized cow might have an amulet tied to her horns, safeguarding her from envy, theft, or disease. Just as the herder's life depended on the herd's survival depended on spiritual care as much as physical. To neglect these protections was to invite disaster. The Fulani also made use of cross-like motifs, carved into wood, painted onto calabashes, or woven into cloth. While the Fulani were deeply Islamic, these designs were older than any one faith. They echoed ancient Sahelian beliefs, representing directions, journeys, and balance. For nomads who lived in constant motion, crossing lands and borders, the cross was not only a religious symbol, but also a map, a reminder that every path had its meeting point, every road intersected with fate. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire's glow flickers, and the desert night deepens. The whispers of prayers linger in the air, soft as the wind. As Islam spread deeper into Fulani life, these symbols did not vanish. Instead, they intertwined. The Quran became a central source of spiritual power, but old Sahelian traditions remained in the background, shaping the way prayers were used. A herder might recite the Fatiha, the opening verse of the Quran, while also tying a charm inherited from his grandfather. The blending was not seen as contradiction, but as harmony, layers of protection, each reinforcing the other. The making of amulets was itself a respected craft. Certain marabouts, Islamic scholars, and healers were known not only for their learning, but for their skill in preparing protective verses. They wrote with careful calligraphy, believing that the precision of each stroke enhanced the charm's strength. Once folded, the paper was wrapped in leather, stitched with care, and sometimes adorned with beads or symbols. In these small pouches, knowledge and faith were condensed into objects of power. But not all symbols were worn on the body. Some were etched into the very patterns of daily life. Calabashes, carved and decorated, often bore symbolic designs. Doorways of Fulani homes sometimes carried protective markings, reminding all who entered that this space was shielded. Women, too, inscribed patterns into hairstyles or facial tattoos, carrying beauty and meaning together. In these marks and objects, one can see the Fulani way of blending practicality with spirituality. A tattoo might serve as identity, beauty, and charm all at once. A calabash was both vessel and talisman. Nothing was just functional. Everything carried layers of meaning. It was also believed that some charms protected against the evil eye, the destructive force of envy. In a society where cattle symbolized wealth and beauty symbolized pride, envy was a real danger. A neighbor's jealousy could bring misfortune as surely as drought. To guard against this, amulets were worn openly, almost like a declaration. This life, these blessings, are under protection. Let's rest again for a breath. The cattle stir nearby, and the scent of leather and smoke drifts through the camp. The Fulani also believed that words themselves carried force. Spoken blessings, whispered prayers, and remembered proverbs acted as invisible shields. Songs sung to cattle were more than affection. They were incantations of care, meant to calm the animals, to invite health and fertility. Likewise, insults were feared, words of ill will could weaken luck, just as surely as charms could strengthen it. Over time, Fulani art and symbolism absorbed influences from across West Africa. From the Hausa, they adopted certain protective motifs. From the Mand, echoes of old charms lingered, and from Islam, the flowing lines of Arabic calligraphy became central, adorning not only amulets, but even the walls of mosques and prayer mats. What emerged was not a replacement of one system by another, but a weaving, a cultural fabric where every thread held a layer of memory. Even today, if you walk through Fulani communities across Mali, Niger, or northern Nigeria, you will see these traces. A leather pouch on a child's neck, a carved calabash passed down through generations, a whispered verse before setting off with the herd. These practices survive not only because of belief, but because they are identity ways of anchoring Fulani life against the shifting sands of history. And so, amulets, crosses, and symbols remain as much cultural heritage as spiritual defense. They remind the Fulani that survival is not only about tending cattle and chasing water, but also about tending the unseen, guarding the soul, and weaving the world with meaning. Let's pause one final time. The flames dim and the stars shimmer above. In the silence of the Sahel night, you can almost hear the whispered prayers carried by the wind. In the vast, undulating plains of the Sahel, the Fulani herders moved like a rhythm of the land itself. Yet, while their lives were rooted in cattle, water, and the shifting seasons, they carried a beauty that was uniquely their own. An elegance as precise and meaningful as the folds of a leather pouch or the careful braiding of hair. To the Fulani, the body was more than flesh. It was a canvas, a statement of identity, and a living connection to ancestors and community. Among both men and women, the adornments were subtle but deliberate. Hairstyles carried meaning, announcing age, clan affiliation, marital status, and even personal achievements. Women might wear their hair in intricate braids, interwoven with beads or cowrie shells, each curl a knot a signal in the language of the desert. Men, too, braided their hair or wore it in carefully maintained styles, their appearance echoing the discipline and pride of the nomadic life. Facial tattoos and scarification. Long-standing traditions among the Fulani were another form of storytelling. A single line traced along a cheek could mark passage into adulthood. Patterns etched across the forehead could signify courage, wisdom, or beauty. These markings were not arbitrary, but imbued with meaning, each one a silent testament to survival and belonging. In the quiet of a campfire night, elders would recount the stories behind these symbols, teaching children how the body itself could carry memory. Jewelry played a parallel role, blending protection, beauty, and status. Necklaces of silver, bracelets of iron or brass, and amulets tied to the body offered spiritual and material security. A herder adorned in this way was a living map of heritage, faith, lineage, and social position, intertwined in a single silhouette against the burning sun or starry sky. The aesthetic sensibility of the Fulani extended to their clothing. Often flowing robes dyed in natural colors, wrapped carefully to balance practicality with elegance. The flowing folds protected against sun, sand, and insects. Yet their drape and arrangement carried subtle cues understood by the community. Patterns embroidered onto fabrics could hint at origin, clan, or personal achievement. Even the simplest garment became a statement of identity. Let's pause here. The campfire crackles, and the distant bleating of cattle mixes with the soft wind, carrying the aroma of earth and leather. The cultural ideal of Fulani beauty was also tied to movement. A herder walking across the plains, staff in hand, with the herd moving in synchrony, embodied poise and control. Children learned early to observe and emulate, understanding that grace and composure were as essential as strength and endurance. Songs and oral stories reinforced these ideals, often recounting legendary ancestors whose courage, beauty, and wisdom shaped the community. Cattle, too, were part of this visual and spiritual aesthetic. Their physical health, markings, and adornments reflected not only wealth, but the herder's skill and taste. A well-kept herd was a living reflection of its caretaker, and the artistic placement of charms, beads, or painted markings was a subtle form of expression. beauty and survival were intertwined, inseparable from the Sahelian landscape itself. Even in the domestic spaces, the emphasis on beauty and identity continued. Camp arrangements were thoughtful, each tent or shelter positioned for protection, airflow, and harmony with the environment. Household items, such as calabashes, mats, and leather goods, were decorated with symbolic patterns, reflecting the same values seen on the body and in the herd. The Fulani aesthetic bridged function and elegance, survival and identity in every aspect of daily life. Stories told at night around the fire preserved these values, linking generations through memory, poetry, and song. Young herders learned to sing praises of ancestors, recount tales of bravery, and observe the rituals that kept the community bonded. Even a simple song could transmit history, ethics, and cultural ideals, echoing across the plains in the same way the wind-shaped sand dunes. Hair, jewelry, tattoos, and rituals were more than beauty. They were instruments of cultural continuity. The Fulani recognized that life in the Sahel was fleeting, fragile, and challenging. To anchor themselves against uncertainty, they wove identity into every gesture, object, and pattern. In doing so, they transformed daily existence, laborious and often harsh, into a canvas of meaning, elegance, and resilience. Let's rest again for a moment. The fire dims as stars shimmer above, and the low murmur of herders' voices blends with the nocturnal sounds of the Sahel. Even today, Fulani communities maintain these traditions. The tattoos, hairstyles, and jewelry are visible, but so too is the intangible layer, the pride, poise, and storytelling that accompany each element. They remind us that survival is not only measured by endurance or wealth, but by the preservation of beauty, culture, and identity in a demanding world. In this way, the Fulani body, adornments, and practices form a living archive. They carry the memory of ancestors, the wisdom of survival, and the elegance of a people who have walked the Sahel for centuries. Every braid, tattoo, song, and charm is a testament, a subtle, enduring narrative of resilience, artistry, and identity, echoing across the plains and through generations yet to come. Across the vast, sun-drenched expanse of the Sahel, the Fulani herders have moved for centuries, their lives dictated by patterns as ancient as the dust and the sun. Guiding them beneath this immense sky is a network of leaders, chiefs, clan elders, and respected figures whose wisdom shapes migration, ensures survival, and holds the community together. Among the Fulani, leadership is never inherited lightly. It is a mantle earned through deep wisdom, undeniable courage, and an intimate, almost spiritual, understanding of the land and the herds. A chief's authority is both practical and profound. He is the one who decides the migration routes each season, possessing the knowledge of where distant waterholes will still hold water, which pastures will flourish after the rains, and which territories might harbor hostility from other groups. You can imagine the elders gathering in quiet councils, perhaps under the shade of a broad acacia tree, their voices measured and calm. They draw upon decades of lived experience, their words weaving together the collective memory of the clan. Decisions are never rushed. The Sahel itself teaches patience, and a hasty choice can have dire consequences. But leadership is more than just strategy. It is a profound moral responsibility. A chief mediates disputes, maintains crucial alliances, and acts as the guardian of tradition, ensuring that ancient customs are respected and passed down. A young herder, watching his elders, learns a powerful lesson. True authority doesn't come from force alone. It grows from a foundation of trust, fairness, and the remarkable ability to foresee challenges long before they appear on the horizon. The guidance of these leaders is the anchor of the community, especially during the lean times of drought, the danger of raids, or moments when survival itself hangs by a thread. The clan structures themselves are intricately tied to the landscape. Each subgroup of Fulani herders understands its place within the larger network, the unspoken boundaries of grazing lands, the shared access to water points, and the established routes that connect distant villages. Leadership is decentralized, yet the elders coordinate with remarkable precision, ensuring that no family, no herd, is ever left isolated and vulnerable. Around the flickering light of evening fires, stories are told. They speak of legendary chiefs, leaders whose brilliant strategies saved entire clans from famine or conflict. These stories are more than entertainment. They are living history, preserving hard-won lessons for generations yet to come. The Fulani also possess a deep and practical wisdom tradition. An incredible amount of knowledge about the stars, the subtle shifts in wind patterns, and the signs of changing seasons is passed down orally, often beautifully embedded in poetry and song. A leader might look to the position of the Milky Way to anticipate the coming of the rains, or to navigate the vast, dark landscape during a nighttime journey. The young learn that survival is as much about keen observation, a sharp memory, and the power of storytelling as it is about physical strength or endurance. It's a holistic understanding of their world. Effective leadership requires a delicate balance between meeting the needs of the present and meticulously preparing for the future. Elders advise on how to distribute the herd to prevent overgrazing, how to ration precious resources during the scarce months, and what contingency plans to enact if disease strikes the livestock. A chief is ultimately judged not just by his skill in navigating the harsh terrain, but by his ability to maintain harmony among families within his clan, between different clans, and even with neighboring tribes. A truly successful leader cultivates respect, not through command, but through a consistent display of wisdom, fairness, and foresight. This wisdom often extends into the spiritual realm. Certain rituals, prayers, and offerings are performed to honor ancestors and to seek divine protection for both the herders and their precious livestock. These practices reinforce the authority of the leaders, seamlessly tying the practical, day-to-day management of the clan to the deep cultural and spiritual fabric of Fulani life. It creates a complete, interwoven system of belief and action. So, let's just pause here for a moment. Imagine the scene. The fire crackles softly, the cool night air carries the distant, gentle calls of grazing animals, and the young herders sit in watchful silence. They are absorbing every lesson, every piece of wisdom woven into the gestures and words of their leaders. This is how knowledge is transferred. This is how a culture endures. But the legacy of Fulani chiefs is not static. It has never been. These elders are masters of adaptation. They have learned from their interactions with neighboring peoples, navigated the pressures from newly formed states, and adjusted their strategies to a changing climate. Leadership is a living, breathing tradition, constantly shaped by necessity and tempered by centuries of accumulated nomadic wisdom. Every single decision, whether about a migration route, a water source, or a political alliance, reflects a profound understanding of both the land and the delicate social web that connects families, herds, and entire communities. In this way, the Sahelian landscape is more than just terrain. It is a classroom. Through careful observation and patient guidance, the leaders teach essential survival skills, pass on cultural knowledge, and instill the ethical principles that bind their society together. They are ensuring that each new generation has the tools and the wisdom to carry the nomadic legacy forward. The chiefs and elders are the very backbone of this resilient system. Their presence is a living testament to the enduring intelligence, adaptability, and spirit of the Fulani people. The sound of a crackling campfire and distant night sounds of the Sahel. As the Sahelian plains stretched endlessly under the sun, the Fulani herders did not exist in isolation. Their lives were interwoven with the very rhythm of trade, the salt caravans, the gold markets, and the bustling towns that dotted the ancient routes. Beyond the herds and the vast grazing lands, a complex world of merchants, rulers, and wealthy patrons shaped the fortunes of Fulani families, connecting them to a wider world that stretched across West Africa and even further beyond. Trade was both a lifeline and a constant challenge. Herders would exchange their precious cattle, milk, and hides for essentials like salt, grains, and cloth. This often meant traversing immense distances to reach market towns, with each journey carrying its own set of risks: hostile terrain, opportunistic bandits, and the sheer unpredictability of the weather. But the rewards could be immense, providing the resources a family needed to survive a harsh dry season or to invest in growing their herd. Through these networks, the Fulani became deeply connected to the economic pulse of the Sahel. Imagine a bustling West African market, UDC Fulani herders skillfully negotiating the sale of their cattle amidst a vibrant scene of colorful textiles, hefty salt blocks, and even shimmering gold dust laid out on market stalls. But these merchants did more than just trade goods. They were conduits of knowledge and culture. When they visited Fulani encampments, they brought news from distant lands, shared innovations in animal husbandry, and introduced new ideas that subtly shaped herding techniques. This created a fascinating flow of influence. The Fulani herders learned to adapt. The traders gained crucial insight into pastoral logistics, and the entire local economy thrived on this powerful mutual dependence. Wealthy patrons, often sultans or influential local rulers, played another critical role. They might sponsor long-distance expeditions, invest in large herds, or offer protection to herding communities in exchange for tribute. These relationships were incredibly delicate. Fulani leaders had to navigate the complex politics of power while fiercely maintaining autonomy over their cattle and families. The most skilled among them perfected the art of balancing loyalty with self-preservation, ensuring their people could benefit from the patronage without being exploited. Picture a Fulani elder with quiet dignity, presenting a prize bull to a sultan under a grand, richly adorned tent. Attendants watch on as ceremonial objects gleam in the light. This scene wasn't just about power. It was also about trust, a trust often reinforced by shared faith. Islamic scholarship further connected Fulani herders to these powerful patrons. Religious leaders often acted as intermediaries, guiding moral and social conduct while strengthening the networks of loyalty. It wasn't uncommon for herders to carry Quranic verses tucked into small leather pouches, believing them to offer protection for their livestock during perilous journeys. It was a seamless blend of faith, commerce, and survival. Of course, these trade routes were not just arteries of commerce. They were also stages for intense competition. Herders vied for the most fertile pastures. Merchants constantly sought the best deals, and patrons maneuvered for influence over critical resources like water sources and trade crossroads. These dynamics taught the Fulani invaluable lessons in adaptability, strategic thinking, and diplomacy. Every caravan journey was a masterclass in calculation, choosing routes to avoid conflict, timing their arrival to coincide with peak market activity, and learning to gauge the true intentions of both allies and rivals. As dawn breaks across the Sahel, you can almost see a Fulani trading caravan moving across the horizon. The silhouettes of herders and their cattle, laden with textiles and other goods, are stark against the golden sun. Through these very networks, the Fulani left an indelible imprint on West African commerce. Cattle became a form of portable wealth, a living, breathing bank account, and the herders' unparalleled knowledge of migration patterns and the land itself made them indispensable guides and protectors for merchant caravans traversing the vast, unmarked wilderness. Over time, intermarriage and strategic alliances strengthened these ties, weaving social, economic, and religious threads into the cohesive fabric of Sahelian life. Yet, this world of wealth and commerce also exposed them to profound vulnerabilities. A sudden outbreak of disease, a prolonged drought, or a violent raid could wipe out a herd in an instant, destroying a family's entire fortune. Even the most prudent and successful herders were subject to the whims of nature and the unpredictable currents of human rivalry. Success required immense foresight, deep collaboration within the community, and sometimes heartbreaking sacrifice. These were the lessons passed down from one generation to the next, told around the crackling fire. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire flickers, the night wind rustles, the acacia leaves, and the stories of long caravans, bustling markets, and powerful patrons seem to echo gently across the plains. Imagine the young herders, listening intently, absorbing the wisdom of their elders. They are learning a fundamental truth, that wealth and survival were inseparable, not just from the land and the herds, but from the intricate social networks their people had built over centuries. Trade also profoundly shaped their identity. Herders learned to navigate not only the physical landscape, but also the moral and social terrain of commerce. Respect was earned through fairness in every transaction, reliability in following the agreed-upon routes, and absolute integrity in dealings with both fellow herders and external patrons. The Sahelian plains were not merely empty spaces to be traversed. They were classrooms of negotiation, ethics, and cultural memory. Ultimately, the influence of merchants and patrons extended far beyond immediate survival. They facilitated a vibrant cultural exchange, created opportunities for education, and provided spiritual guidance. Fulani communities became living hubs of oral history, poetry, and profound knowledge, transmitting not just practical skills for herding, but the very stories that celebrated resilience, ingenuity, and the enduring, sacred connection between their people and the land. In this way, the Fulani's relationship with trade and their elite patrons exemplifies a delicate, masterfully maintained balance between fierce independence and necessary interdependence, between timeless tradition and constant adaptation, between raw survival and the pursuit of prosperity. Each journey, every transaction, and each new alliance only served to reinforce the rich, complex, and beautiful tapestry of Fulani life, ensuring that even in a harsh and unpredictable world, their communities could endure, thrive, and pass on their incredible heritage. As the sun dips below the Sahelian horizon, the herders gather around low fires, the embers glowing against the deepening blue of the evening sky. Here, under acacia trees and starlit heavens, the stories of Fulani heritage are whispered and sung, reminding all who listen that the life of a herder is more than cattle trade or survival. It is an identity forged across generations. The Fulani's legacy stretches far beyond the wandering herds, from the grasslands of Mali to the Nigerian plains and into the wetlands of Senegal. The influence of Fulani governance, culture, and social norms is woven into the history of West Africa. Chiefs and elders, who once guided migrations and mediated conflicts, are remembered in oral histories as symbols of wisdom and endurance. Their decisions shaped the patterns of settlement, trade, and diplomacy, leaving a footprint that still echoes in the rhythms of contemporary communities. Central to Fulani identity is the profound relationship with cattle. More than wealth or food, these animals symbolize social bonds, honor, and familial continuity. Marriages, bride prices, and community standing were all measured in cattle, intertwining the pastoral economy with the social fabric. Milk, butter, and cheese carried both nutritional and symbolic weight, while herding rituals and seasonal movements reaffirmed connections to land and tradition. The stories of past migrations, heroic deeds, and ancestral guidance are inseparable from the cattle that traverse the Sahel, marking the passage of time and reinforcing communal memory. Fulani culture also celebrates aesthetic and spiritual dimensions. Tattoos, hairstyles, jewelry, and clothing signal age, status, and personal achievements, while oral poetry and song articulate the values and ideals of the community. Around the fire, elders recite tales of ancestors who braved harsh environments, negotiated alliances, and defended herds, instilling lessons in courage, patience, and resilience. These narratives function as both education and preservation, ensuring that each generation carries forward the ethos of their people. Even as modernization, climate change, and political boundaries reshape the West African landscape, the Fulani identity endures. The herding practices, while adapted, remain a touchstone of cultural pride, and the stories, songs, and rituals continue to anchor communities in shared history. Younger herders learn not only the techniques of cattle management, but also the moral and spiritual frameworks that guide behavior, social relations, and respect for the land. Conflicts over land, droughts, and encroaching urbanization present challenges to this way of life. Yet the Fulani have consistently demonstrated remarkable resilience. They navigate disputes through negotiation, adapt their routes to shifting resources, and maintain social cohesion through kinship and clan structures. The traditions of leadership, mentorship, and shared responsibility persist, providing stability in uncertain times. And herders stretching across the golden horizon, dust rising gently with each step. The Fulani legacy is also visible in political and religious history. From the Sokoto Jihad to regional leadership roles, herders have transitioned into governance, scholarly pursuits, and broader societal influence, linking pastoral knowledge with civic responsibility. This dual role of mobile herders and influential citizens illustrates the adaptability and intelligence inherent in Fulani culture. Their contribution to West African identity encompasses law, faith, commerce, and education, reflecting a multifaceted heritage that continues to inspire. Through centuries, oral history has been the vessel of cultural transmission. Every song, proverb, and story told beside the fire or in market squares reinforces a collective memory of endurance and ingenuity. The beauty of language, rhythm, and ritual ensures that even in a rapidly changing world, the core of Fulani identity, pride in heritage, reverence for cattle, and the sanctity of community remains vivid. As the night deepens and stars blanket the sky, the Fulani people's history is carried in the rustling of grass, the lowing of cattle, and the quiet conversations around the fire. The tales of migration, trade, spiritual protection, and leadership merge into a tapestry that teaches patience, resilience, and respect for life's rhythms. For every herder and every community member, these lessons are living, breathing threads connecting the past to the present and guiding the journey into the future. This enduring cultural pride ensures that Fulani heritage is not confined to memory alone. It thrives in practice, in song, in the deliberate care of animals, and in the moral guidance passed from elders to youth. The Sahelian plains, harsh and demanding, are simultaneously classroom, stage, and sanctuary, where identity, survival, and legacy converge. The stories of resilience, skill, and adaptability remind us that the Fulani herder's life is both extraordinary and challenging. Though modern pressures alter their pathways, the principles that governed past generations, reverence for cattle, kinship networks, spiritual practices, and negotiation with nature continue to inform daily life. Each trek across the plains, each ritual for protection, each communal decision reinforces an enduring framework of values that have allowed Fulani culture to persist for centuries. In conclusion, the Fulani people embody the interplay of human endurance and environmental harmony. They are custodians of pastoral knowledge, transmitters of oral history, and exemplars of a cultural identity that has weathered drought, migration, conflict, and social change. By understanding their heritage, we appreciate the depth of their resilience, the richness of their traditions, and the enduring significance of cattle, community, and ethical leadership in shaping West African history. You are now under the expansive, starry Sahelian sky, listening to the whispered history of the Fulani, absorbing the rhythms of the plains, and carrying the stories into your own quiet reflection.
As the night deepens and the Sahelian wind whispers softly across the plains, we pause to reflect on the journeys we have shared, from the grueling treks of Fulani herders to the intricate dances of seasonal migrations, from the sacred value of cattle to the profound beauty of their cultural expression. We have walked slowly through a landscape that is as much spiritual as it is physical. The Sahel stretches endlessly under the starry sky, and in its vast openness we see the delicate balance of life that the Fulani have navigated for centuries. Each hoofbeat of the herd, each measured step along ancient migration routes, and each whispered counsel from elders to youth carries timeless lessons in patience, resilience, and reverence. These lessons echo not only across the plains of West Africa, but within the human heart, reminding us of the enduring bond between people, land, and tradition. In these quiet moments, the stories linger, stories of survival, negotiation, and innovation, stories of spiritual insight and practical wisdom, stories of beauty expressed in body, attire, and song. We have witnessed the herders' endurance in the face of drought and disease, their courage amid rival clans and banditry, and their careful guidance through the rhythms of seasonal life. These narratives, woven into the fabric of daily existence, illustrate a culture deeply attuned to its environment, resilient in adversity, and rich in moral and aesthetic principles. We have seen how leadership and communal structures shaped the movements of people across challenging terrain, how the Fulani negotiated relationships with traders, religious scholars, and regional powers, and how these interactions extended their influence far beyond the plains. Even in our modern world, the echoes of these migrations and pastoral practices continue to inform Fulani identity and societal roles. At the heart of it all lies the sacred relationship with cattle, the lifeblood of Fulani wealth, social ties, and spiritual practice. Each herd is a living archive of knowledge, guiding migrations, sustaining communities, and symbolizing honor, continuity, and resilience. The songs sung around fires, the poems recited under the stars, and the rituals performed at each camp serve as living connections to ancestors, ensuring that identity and memory traverse generations alongside the herds. Through this slow journey, we also recognize the challenges faced by modern Fulani communities: climate change, encroachment on grazing lands, and social transformation. Yet these pressures only illuminate the enduring adaptability of a people who have survived centuries of movement and environmental uncertainty. Their culture is not static but living, sustained by the rhythms of daily life, communal decision-making, and spiritual observance. As we close our exploration under the wide African sky, the narrative of the Fulani herders invites us to slow down, to listen, and to reflect. We carry with us the echoes of hoofbeats on dry earth, the murmurs of wisdom from elders, the laughter of children, and the subtle music of a life lived in harmony with the land. Their legacy reminds us that culture, identity, and resilience are inseparable from the environments we inhabit, the communities we nurture, and the stories we tell. May this journey leave you with a sense of calm and connection, a gentle understanding of the intertwined lives of people and landscape, and the quiet strength that comes from observing history not as a distant fact, but as a lived experience. The Fulani herders walked long paths and faced countless challenges, yet they preserved a heritage of beauty, skill, and dignity. In listening to their story, we honor that endurance and allow it to settle softly within us. You are now under the Sahelian stars, carrying the stories of the Fulani herders into your own restful imagination. Their wisdom, resilience, and grace become part of the stillness around you, a gentle lullaby of African history that can echo softly into sleep. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If these stories moved you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel to continue exploring the rich tapestry of human culture. Until next time, travel well. You are under Baobab skies.